Yo, boys, welcome back to Star Spangled Gamblers. As promised, we are very excited to be kicking off campaign season 2022 with one of the great sphinxes of political prediction. I am talking about Robert Cahaly, founder and chief pollster of the Trafalgar Group. Many of you follow each and every poll he drops, which these days is quite a few. So, Robert, most of our users are familiar with you. They're familiar with your work. We are a podcast that is representative of like borderline autistic, psychotic bros obsessed with political prediction. So welcome to the Lion's Den of excitement and degeneracy. We are super excited to have you here. Are you okay with that introduction? Did I do you right?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. I'll take that as a win. So, Robert, we are by background kind of political guys from the our side who went on and did other things with our lives. I went to Hollywood, which means I think like a character's backstory and humanizing them is very important. So I was hoping I could just ask you up front, like, what makes a polling guy? Like, do you have to start reading Frank Lunt's books when you're really young, or are you like barred from the industry if you ever owned a paintball gun or played football, or like when does one decide to be a polling guy?
Well, I would hope reading Frank Lunt's books doesn't get you there, because that would certainly have you leaning the other direction these days. No, I would tell you there are different kinds of poll people. There are people who really, really get off on the numbers and number crunching. And then there are people who their background is politics and they understand people. And I'm much more of the understand people. I'm not near as much of the huge number cruncher. But I think that's what's wrong with modern polling, is everybody is so stuck in this paradigm of, well, we have to do it this way because that's the way we've always done it, and this is the most scientifically efficient, and this is what the system is supposed to be. And they're stuck in a mold that just doesn't work anymore. I mean, when people would answer the phone and had 20 minutes to talk with you and answer all your questions, man, this model works really well. And when there was no shame for having a political opinion, but those days are gone. People are busy, they're shamed for their political opinions. And if you don't understand that this industry has got to change as the people giving the information have changed, then you're falling behind, which is why I refer to so many of the other pollsters as the Pony Express pollsters.
Well, okay, so that is exactly what I would say if I were both a pollster and a C math student. Now, I'm one of those things. I was a C math student, but I'm not a pollster. So were you an A math student, or were you like me?
I was good at math. It's just not something I love.
Got
What I love more than math is pattern recognition, and that's not the same thing. But it is a part of math, and pattern recognition is very important for polling. Like, for example, if there's a mistake on a poll, I'll notice it because something just doesn't make sense. And I'll go, wait a minute, no. Logic tells me that. And I'll feel it before I'll actually be able to put my finger on what it is.
Got it. Well, the reason why I'm asking about being an A math student is we love to make fun of Nate Silver. Like, political gamblers and Nate Silver have like a mutual circle of fire of disdain and shit talking, although we're nobody, so he doesn't really clap back at us. But Nate Silver, early in Trafalgar's history, gave you guys a C minus, recently upgraded you to an A minus. Like, any words for Nate Silver about who's the A student now?
Well, you know what, I'm a little more lenient on Nate Silver, because Nate Silver is an aggregator. He is only as good as the polls that he has to use. So I think Nate Silver is an excellent statistician. I think that his choice in who he includes in his average leads to most of his problems. But I think he's actually very good at what he does. I've just got questions about some of the groups that he puts in there. And when you oversample, if you're trying to give it a polling average, then having groups that are very one-sided make up a disproportionate amount of your polling average is going to skew your average.
Isn't that kind of everyone?
Not really. I think that it's just a matter of the way that you include and who you include and who you don't include. I mean, I would say that at least Nate is aware enough to realize that you don't have to do it exactly the same way to be included, unlike whatever the American Association of Public Opinions and all that nonsense.
Uh-huh.
And those guys who have their models, and you can't be a member if you don't subscribe to what they believe in. And I think what they believe in is completely outdated, and again, it's Pony Express. So yeah, they're not going to include anything we do because they don't understand what we do because it breaks their model.
Got it. We have a coterie of people who literally have quit their jobs, and what they do is actually bet on polling numbers before they come out. And there is a vast and deep conspiracy theory that Real Clear Politics is actually a thinly veiled shill for conservatives, and that they adjust their polling averages and stuff like that. Would you like to throw any water on that campfire at this point? Or
absolutely throw some water on it, because I'm constantly frustrated by the fact that there's only a few of us out there that I think are putting out real numbers. And I think that in Real Clear Politics and 538's defense, when there's only 3 or 4 pollsters who are out there focused on telling the truth, and 20 or 30 who are out there and pushing an agenda, it's real hard to get your averages right.
Can you elaborate on that, actually? So when you say real numbers, you mentioned part of it is agenda driven. I suppose, I mean, one of the challenges we have as bettors is figuring out which polls are correct and which not. I mean, let's say that you are trying to do a poll with an agenda in mind. What do you do to cook the books? Like, what are the things that we should look for?
I'm glad to tell you. Love that.
Let's
First of
go.
all, you do registered voters only, and you don't do likely voters. That's your first sign that they're playing the games, because registered voters are going to skew left.
Uh-huh.
They just always have, and they always will. The second thing is you ask a ridiculous amount of questions, because as you continue to ask long questionnaires, weed out average people and include people who care about politics too much, who tend to skew left. The other thing you do is you pass off 600, 500, it's a whole state. And these are things you absolutely do in that situation. So the other things that you do is, the other way to measure it is, keep in mind a very simple thing. These are all businesses, okay? And your business depends on getting it right. Like, we don't really work for campaigns directly very much. We don't really work for parties. Most of our clients are businesses, organizations, and high net worth individuals who want to know what's really going to happen outside of spin. So if we're consistently really way off, then we don't get paid anymore. I mean, the reason our average error rate over the last 3 years is lower than the rest of them is because we don't get paid very well if it isn't. But look at 2016, look at 2020, and look at these average error rates. The ones that are in the 5s and the 6s, not the ones below 3 like us, those guys are still getting paid. Now you wonder, why are they still getting paid? And the reason they're still getting paid is because their media outlet or their university had no reward for getting it right. Their reward was for pushing an agenda. Because if it wasn't, they would have fired them.
Was that a side swipe at like Morning Consult or
Morning Consult isn't even. Here's the thing. Let me tell you about Morning Consult. All right. The only test that us pollsters get is when we do elections. And when you announce you're not going to do elections anymore and you avoid doing any polls within a month of an election, it's you saying, I don't want to take the test, teacher. I assure you I'm smart. Well,
you want to do YouGov next?
Fail at polling. And anyone who believes anything that Morning Consult puts out there is making a big mistake, because anytime, any state, whenever they're ready, put their money where their mouth is, we'll beat them.
I love that. You sound like a political bettor. Like, I'm willing to stake my opinions with my labor here. I'm not just going to talk about it at a bar.
Well, because I'm not ashamed of doing it. I'm not hiding and trying to sell a bunch of nonsense and corporate shill. I'm not working for a corporate agenda. I'm working for the truth.
Who are others in your field who you think are honest and trying to look for the truth, even if you may disagree with them on methodology or so forth.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of Rasmussen reports. I think those guys do a first-class job, and they do a lot of volume, and they're very impressive. Obviously, probably seen me interview with him. I think Matt Towery is the gold standard. I have a lot of respect for Matt. I think Mark Penn is a fantastic pollster. And schools-wise these days, I think Emerson College is setting the standard for schools. I mean, if I had a kid that was looking at going to school, studying polling, I'd send him to Emerson College.
I feel like you just gave two polls that our audience would have predicted you would like, and then one that they're like, "Whoa!" Like that's not. We didn't think we were going to hear Emerson come from Cahaly.
They're doing. I'm very impressed with the work they're doing. I think more than most, they've kind of made some adjustments, and I mean, you got to credit where credit's due.
So one of the reasons why you're such a sphinx to people in our world, probably to people like I see you on the news a lot because I think a lot of people are somewhat enchanted with you being a bit of a contrarian, and a contrarian that's often proven to be correct, is you don't really hedge. Like most of your polls don't have crosstabs in them, which is different.
Well, the ones you see.
Yeah.
Remember our clients, the people who are the individuals, the companies, what they pay for is those crosstabs.
Got it. So that's your answer when it's the mob is outside of Lot's house and Gomorrah is the client paid for the crosstabs. It's that's you don't get that as the public, you get the findings, but it's just a business decision on your part, basically.
Yeah, because if I don't give the client something more valuable than what I put on Twitter, why should they pay?
Got it.
And there's also lots of other questions we ask that you'll never see because the clients want to know.
Got it.
So, I mean, and these aren't people paying for a particular race. They're saying for 2022, we want to know what's up. They don't have a side. They just want to know what's going on. And these are just paid subscribers. I mean, Rasmussen has paid subscribers too. There's nothing strange about that. But no, we don't give a lot of details because one of the first things, and we learned this the hard way, because when people start digging into crosstabs, one of the things that they miss, the biggest misnomer, and we still get it even when we break down like party breakdown, is there is self-identified party, and there's what party you're actually in.
Right.
Okay. Now, in states where you register by party, believe it or not, people who are registered Democrats for 10 years will say Republican. Okay. So people go, well, why do you have all these Republicans? Well, that's because you have to understand there's a difference between self-identified and how you vote. And in states where you don't register by party, then all you can determine by party is either go with what they say, which is the worst way to do it, or go with how they usually vote. But how people vote on party in most states that don't register by party is more a reflection of their willingness or ability to participate in their local elections. For example, you live in an all-Democrat county, you're a Trump Republican, red as you can be, but if you want to have a vote for sheriff, you got to vote in the Democrat primary.
Right. I live in LA County, so I know exactly what that feels like.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so we put out to some of our friends and family that you were going to be on the podcast, and they sort of sent us some questions too about some of the data you've produced recently. So what's up with, I think you recently had a survey that showed we're at an R+6, so Republicans having a 6-point advantage on the generic ballot. But looking like also from one of your surveys that Ron Johnson is in trouble over in Wisconsin against Democrat Mandela Barnes. That tells a peculiar story, and I'm not saying it's not the true story, but I want to know what the story is.
It's an anti-incumbent year.
Oh, okay.
It is an anti-incumbent year. And so when they talk about the Republicans having a hard map, I agree, but here's what makes Republican maps easier. Yes, they've got more seats to defend, but Alabama, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, they're not running incumbents. They're bringing brand new candidates. And so I would tell you that I am, from a perspective of looking at these, I think that it is people are frustrated with incumbents. We see incumbents happening, like, unless you have really been a standout. I mean, this anti-incumbent explains why Rubio is polling so far behind DeSantis. DeSantis may be an incumbent, but he's a 4-year incumbent. He hadn't been there forever. But these people who've been there a couple of terms, there's some fatigue, and there's this sense that things are broken and people are mad. And so I think this, and if you'll, one of the tweets I put out about the student loan forgiveness was that there's a big anti-incumbent fervor out there, and non-incumbents. I think it's definitely an anti-incumbent environment, and specifically Ron Johnson. What we're hearing out of that district is much what we were hearing in Wyoming. People saying, "Hey, really wish Liz Cheney would be a little more worried about Wyoming than January 6th." People in Wisconsin saying, "Really wish Ron Johnson would care a little bit more about what's going on in Wisconsin. We got our own problems," versus Hunter's laptop every time we see him on TV.
Got it. Yeah, I was concerned about seeing it the other way, that Mandela Barnes would be kind of viewed as an incumbent and kind of a machine hack. But I mean, I guess it makes sense that he is not the incumbent in the case of that Senate seat. He is the new face.
So when you say that an election year is an anti-incumbent year, what are the kind of questions that you ask to gauge that? I mean, how do you arrive at that conclusion? And I suppose as bettors, we're sensitive to the issue because we've all had the experience of seeing close polling, and then at the end of the day, election night comes and a fundamental just advantage for incumbency ends up winning out. So how do you make that determination?
Well, part of it is we hear from a lot of the people taking polls going, "I'm sick of everybody." Ones who volunteer, "We need term limits. We got too many of these guys that have been there too long." People who are saying, like somebody asked me yesterday if I thought there might be a hidden vote for a hidden vote in Wisconsin for Ron Johnson. I said, well, I think in Ron Johnson's case, it's more of a reluctant vote. Like, they're not excited about it. They really don't think you're doing a great job, but they hadn't been sold that anybody's better. I think he's got a reluctant vote out there that will end up voting for him, but they're not willing to commit right now, because what we see is a few people who are extremely anti-Biden who are just not ready to just say, "I'm voting for Johnson." There's just no enthusiasm behind him. But, it's mainly just that we hear constantly back from people who are just like, they're all bad. The number of people who say the Republicans and the Democrats neither, put them all in the trash. None of them are any good. I mean, we hear it all the time, just kind of a throw the rascals out mentality, a lot of open ends telling us things like that. But it's also just in the measuring and looking at the difference at the fresh, kind of the fresher candidates they don't have any of that baggage. Because even with Republicans in an let's say this is a bad year for the Democrats and a bad year for Biden, there's still a certain segment of the people who are mad at people who voted for a bunch of COVID relief when the Republicans were in charge.
Yeah.
And very frustrated about that. So, I mean, no one looks at all the senators and says, "Oh, these guys are all innocent and these guys are all evil."
So, I mean, I think we're obviously going to want to ask you about the current slate of candidates, but as you were talking, I mean, one kind of case study came to mind, which was Susan Collins in, I guess it was 2018. So, bad year, obviously, for Republicans, anti-Trump. I mean, all the polling indicated that if this was close, maybe there was a slight edge for the Democrats, and yet Collins won. So, I mean, in a year like that, was there anything that...
Well, yeah, I would tell you that's ranked choice voting because of the nature of ranked choice. Having grown up in the South and grown up in what we would consider a runoff environment, ranked choice voting is essentially, in that kind of race, is an instant runoff. And when you get right down to it, most people's second choice, who weren't, they were reluctant Collins voters too. So we weren't surprised by that. You would not see us among the people who were predicting Susan Collins' defeat.
And so looking at the current slate of Senate candidates, we don't have to go one by one, but are there any that scream at you like they're particularly vulnerable, and others who you think the reluctant vote will ultimately sort of leave them in better shape than they might look right now?
I think Johnson is the most vulnerable on the Republican side. On the Democrat side, I think that it's really going to depend on how some things continue to play out. But I would say that there is a Patty Murray has got a lot of reluctant vote, and Smiley is a very attractive candidate with a compelling story. And it may very well people end up just kind of staying home, staying home with their party and not migrating over to give somebody new a chance. But I think that one's going to be that one's a little closer than it ought to be, and it could stay that way.
You didn't make the posh pick there of saying Joe O'Dea over in Colorado.
I would put that second as far as my surprises, but I think that Murray's a little weaker. And no, but I think definitely what I would talk about is it's hard right now to measure what the potential Republican vote could be, because this was kind of the article that was out a couple of days ago from Nate Cohen in the New York Times that I talked about last night on Hannity, was this idea that the polls could be underestimating the vote of Republicans in the same old places they did in 2016 and 2020. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And what some of the differences are, in 2016, there were kind of shy Trump voters, people who were reluctant to say they were for Trump, who were being polled, just weren't being honest. And we have some pretty good techniques for getting around that, and we were able to get around that more than anybody else. But in 2020, it wasn't so much shy, it was that they didn't want to participate in polls because they didn't really know who was asking. They didn't want to be canceled. They didn't want to be publicized. They didn't want to be recorded on the phone. And I will tell you that Biden's speech in front of there with, the Marines and the red background.
Yeah.
If you don't think that's created a whole bunch of shy and a whole bunch of don't want to be polled Republicans, you're making a mistake. It really has. It's taken people who might have put a bumper sticker on their car, who might have put a sign on their yard, and they're doing nothing, and they're keeping their vote quiet, and they're not telling anybody. So I think that's going to be a little bit of a vote that's hard to measure right now, because again, we can measure shy vote. We can't measure people who don't take the poll. We can try our best to get a better sample, which is what we did in 2020. And that's where we were able to have a lower error rate than most. And we picked more. We had more top picks in states than others. But I think that number could be really high. And if that number is 1 or 2%, and it could be that high, you could see real big surprises coming. And I think Cohen is smart to start telling everybody you need to be watching out.
I don't want to editorialize too much, but I think lefty people tend to really underestimate how much right of center America thinks that they want them just on boats, deported from the country, stamped out from the dialogue forever. And how much that motivates people. I have unpolitical friends who send me, text messages about how they just lied to a pollster, or about how they, it's a real
thing.
Yeah.
And what's funny is the same little people in the official organization of public opinion say that this stuff doesn't exist, that there is no such thing as a shy voter. We just underestimated college education. Shut up. You didn't fix it. You said that's what you did, and yet you missed DeSantis too, because you don't know how to do this. You can't acknowledge people lie. People tell, they lie to their priest, they lie to their doctor, they lie to everybody in their life, and all of a sudden, but on the phone talking to a pollster, they're always honest, Abe. That isn't even realistic. Of course they lie. People lie about everything. People lie for no reason. And so you have to acknowledge that human behavior and that desire of humans to have the person asking a question look at them favorably will affect what they say. To say that it isn't is just being ignorant. But the thing is, they're so stuck to their models, they can't acknowledge it.
Right.
But it's a real thing.
Right.
And it is a real problem. We all know it. We all know inherently exists because all of us know people who do it. But, the establishment will keep telling you it doesn't exist. But of course it exists. And you're right. There's this feeling. I mean, it's amazing. I never thought in all the years of, growing up and looking at the way the left and the right were, and always kind of feeling sympathetic to the left free speech movement.
Right.
I never thought I'd live in a world where the free speech people are on the right. That still shocks me, that the tolerance has moved the complete other way. But there is this sense of, if you don't fit a certain narrative, you shouldn't speak. And to suggest that people who feel a certain way are a threat to democracy, I mean, that's a threat to democracy. Saying that if you feel a certain way, you're a threat to democracy. I mean, stifling free speech like that is a threat to democracy. And I don't think they understand the chilling effect it has on what people are going to say, and the motivational effect it has on what people are going to do.
Well, I mean, first of all, I guess I should congratulate you, because you have a bow tie on, you're wearing what looks like a Tattersall suit, and talking about free speech. You are the counterculture, and I'm not saying this is clowning. Like
I've been called a lot of things, brother, but that is not that have never called me counterculture.
But it's true, right? Like people like you are the ones on the outside who are, raising hell for people on the inside. Like it's not what we're used to it looking like. It's not like stinky hippies, throwing eggs and stuffing flowers in machine gun barrels. It's like people that just sort of have normal points of view that used to be common, and like now are kind of weird to, those who wield cultural power. So didn't mean to step on my own joke there, but I do kind of.
That's pretty good. I like it. That's pretty funny.
Well, so can I hold you to make one more contrarian prediction?
Sure.
We have a number of charities that we donate to here. One of them is for Donkey Rescue, and another is for Autism Speaks. The autism one is because so many of our users are borderline autistic. Anyway, so if you get it right, we'll donate $100. We're not rich, but we're not poor. We're generous people. So I would like to ask you if you could please pick one of these things that will be proven false. Okay. Republicans will win the House again. Trump will run for president again. Both Blake Masters and Dr. Oz will lose. Which one of those sort of media narratives do you want to kill?
And Dr. Oz will lose, will be proven false.
You think one or both will win?
I'd say right now, I got some more numbers to run, but I would tell you, I would bet on at least one of them with an outside chance of both. But neither winning, not possible.
Right. The Oz take, you'll actually be on this podcast. There's another brief segment where someone will be saying that he's betting against Oz because Doug Mastriano is such an anchor. I am on Oz. I'm betting on Oz. I'm not going to talk about why, but I just want to put the ball in your court. Is Doug Mastriano is that an albatross that's too heavy for Oz's long, pretty TV, made for television neck?
I don't think so, because here's the thing. Look at the margin. Look at how Mastriano does it. It seems to be pacing with Oz, and Shapiro seems to be pacing very much with Fetterman. You would think the way they have sold it is, having participated in the rally at the Capitol and question the election, make Mastriano unelectable, but people in Pennsylvania don't think that.
Yeah.
So I think it was easy to write this guy off because, again, the people on the left can't conceive of a world where someone could do those things and win. But no, I don't think that he's an albatross, because he is not part of what's going on. And there are people in Pennsylvania that are frustrated. I think we're going to see, quite possibly in Pennsylvania, a few less ballots that are coming late that don't have postmarks on. I think that there's going to be a lot more attention about integrity there, and I think that's going to be good all the way around.
Got it.
Why would you say so? What you were saying earlier about people lying to pollsters, I mean, intuitively that sounds correct to me, but to me that doesn't directly answer the question of why over the last few cycles we've seen some states particularly prone to polling errors. Wisconsin is one of the ones that comes to mind. I mean, just certain polls, I mean, massively wrong there. So I suppose I have a two-part question here. One, why have we seen some states more prone to major polling errors than others? And then the second part of it would be, looking ahead, Is there any way that we can hypothesize or guess as to which states might have more of an error rate or might be more prone to a surprise than others?
Well, again, it's hard for me to talk about why people keep getting Wisconsin so wrong because we didn't. I think we had it Trump behind Biden by a half a point, which would have been almost exactly what it was. So we didn't seem to have a problem there. But I think what I would tell you the biggest problem is, and whether they do it on purpose or not, is again, these long questionnaires. These long questionnaires overestimate people who pay too much attention to politics, and people who have higher education tend to be more willing to participate in polls. I saw one the other day, and it doesn't matter what state it was. And I looked at and it said 50% of the people who took this poll described themselves as having a college degree, a graduate degree, or a postgraduate degree. 50%. Now, guys, they ain't a state in America where the general election turnout is 50% college graduates. But if you're going to ask people 42 questions, that's exactly the kind of people who take those polls. And Wisconsin is the kind of place that has a big difference between the people who are those blue collar folks who don't have those college degrees, who feel one way, and the other group that feel in quite the opposite way. And the fact that Wisconsin, even though it has I believe an advantage to Republican registration, is a swing state, and there's not a lot like that. So I think it's the overestimating of the college graduate population, because you get such long questionnaires that, regular folks don't bother with them. Because again, regular people, the first question they always ask us, how long is this going to take? And if your answer is anything more than, it's just 5 questions, just 6 questions, just 3 minutes, they're hanging up. So I would tell you, if you want to be a good consumer of polling, look at the number of questions. When you see it north of 15, north of 20, it's garbage.
So I have an idea for a polling company based on what you just told me. What if I went out and made some TikTok videos that were like a minute long of, people making grilled cheese or shooting guns or something like very basic, and then just had one question at the end, which is like, do you like Joe Biden? Like, would that work?
It's a TikTok video, so how do they vote? Because I'm not a good TikTok guy.
I don't know. We'll get the boys to sponsor a software engineer, and we'll just steal the software from China is what we'll do.
Yeah, if you can keep people's interest, I think it does affect what you get. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you want to do an in-depth study of people who have strongly held opinions, yeah, long questionnaires make plenty of sense. But if you are ostensibly trying to say this represents how the electorate's going to break down, then asking these long questionnaires is ridiculous. And I'll give you another example. This is my favorite. One of the major television networks keep putting out all these polls, and they're all live calls. All live calls. Now, I want you guys to think about this for a minute. How many people do you know who are millennials or Gen Z who will answer the phone from a number they don't recognize, verbally speak to them on the phone, and answer 30 questions? Do you know one normal Gen Z or millennial who would do that?
Yeah, that sounds like I would just assume it was a scam, like auto warranty call or something like that.
Exactly. Now, my point is, how the hell are you supposed to poll America when you can't poll millennials or Gen Zs at all?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Let's raise a couple million.
That's why they suck.
How would you, what's your view generally on the accuracy or potential of political prediction markets? Because I suppose, at least in theory, one would argue that one of the benefits of a prediction market would be that all these different factors that you're mentioning that are inherently difficult in polling, that information can come into a prediction market, and the wisdom of the crowds can produce something valuable. So do you buy the theory, and then practically do you use political predictions at all, and thinking about how you do
It's interesting you would ask that.
Yeah.
One, I value political prediction markets probably a little more than polling, because at least if you're putting your money into making a bet, you're trying to get it right. I can't say that much of average polling companies. I think so many polling companies, especially those that work for the media or some of the universities, are trying to affect the electorate and not reflect the electorate. Now, as far as do we use the markets, I kind of see that as unethical. If I can affect the polling market, the prediction market, I don't think I should do it. And so we don't.
Well, I guess what I meant is, so when I look at the Trafalgar's polls, I mean, it's very interesting where sometimes the polling that you're coming up with is more or less in tune with where the markets are. Sometimes they're radically off. I mean, or I would argue, for example, you might have a race that shows that it's within, 3 or 4 points, and yet the markets are saying it's like a 90-10 favorite or something. I mean, does that give you pause that maybe, you might want to take? Not at all.
Well, let me tell you this.
Yeah.
Perfect example. The other day, somebody asked us to do a poll, and they said, "Hey, we can send you what some of the other polls are." And I said, "You know what? Our goal is never to engage in what's called herding, which is this tendency of polling companies to try to not be so different from each other. I don't want to see what somebody else said. I don't want that knowledge in my head, because even in the back of your mind, it can affect what you do." So, and I'll give you a perfect example. The other day, we were beating our brains in because we had Herschel Walker up by 0.8 of a point. And I'm like, God, we've done 4 polls in this state. We have not had him up by anything. We must have done something wrong. We must have done something wrong. We didn't even think to look at what some other polls said. And then somebody calls me and said, Emerson just put one out that said Herschel's up by 2. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So we're sitting there beating ourselves up because we can't explain what we did because we didn't even look at what somebody else did. We had to be called and told. So no, I don't like to have that kind of stuff get in there, because again, information that you don't possess cannot affect what you do. Information you do possess, even subconsciously, can affect what you do.
Well, so maybe that's a good landing point with respect to your time, Robert. You're a pollster and you're quite good at what you do, but inevitably people ask you questions about, well, like, what about this one thing you said once that wasn't right? Like that whole thing. So, but like, what about this one thing you said once? So in 2020, you were pretty certain that Georgia was not a swing state. And now it's burned into like all of our heads. We're all triggered. Like, what's Georgia going to do? What's Georgia going to do? So do you want to weigh in and definitively say whether or not Georgia is a swing state, or if Trump just did his weird thing with that election? Like, what is going on in Georgia now?
I think the questions about Georgia and how the election was conducted have been dealt with very substantially. The new law requires a lot of signatures and a lot of information on the ballots, and they've moved the ballot boxes indoors. And I think you'll get a better reflection of where Georgia actually stands in the fall of 2022. And then we can talk about whether Georgia is a swing state anymore.
Okay. All right. I like that. Like, I like that. That is like a movie preview for this election. And I'm eager to see where it goes, as are, I think, a great many people in this country. Thank you for that. Pratik, do you want to take us home?
Yeah, well, look, I'll ask you one final tough question, which I think is on a lot of our viewers' minds, and it's one that we struggle with as well. I mean, what I find interesting, Robert, about sort of your brand, so to speak, is that you're, on the one hand, very disciplined as a pollster, but you're also not shy about talking about your own political leanings, and we got some of that here. I think one of the things in our political prediction community, I found that most people have an ideology, but their ideology doesn't like no one really says, okay, I support Trump, therefore I'm going to go place a bet on Trump. I mean, very few people do that. The bias is more indirect, right? So like when you believe something politically, you're probably thinking about the world in a certain way, which then makes you prone to kind of subconscious biases or whatever. I mean, I guess to what degree do you worry that your political leanings or so forth might inadvertently affect how you do polling, and does that make you prone to certain errors? Like how would you respond to a critique like that of your polling or methodology?
Well, first of all, and I've given this answer many times in interviews, you may find it fascinating. Anyone who thinks I would rather the Republicans win because I'm a Republican than get a poll right doesn't know me very well. My competitive nature is certainly stronger than my need to see an ideology win. Second, I always look at it as like, what, again, remember I was just describing the Herschel Walker?
Yeah.
The first thing I want to know is, what did we do wrong? What did we miss? My question is always, how could this be wrong? Where are the errors? And if anything, and we've been criticized by this, I mean, I think I harken back to a recent Michigan poll of, believe it or not, people saying, you're overestimating Democrat turnout. No, what I'm doing is when I look at potential turnout scenarios, I'm not looking at the one most rosy for the GOP. I look at the one that would be closer down the middle, and if it errs one way or the other, to the other side, because I want to anticipate, what could be, like I said, that subconscious bias in the way to see things. But the other thing is, and this is something I learned from a lot of guys who were I grew up doing politics in South Carolina, and a lot of the guys that I learned from were contemporaries of Lee Atwater. And Lee Atwater used to have a saying: most political operatives think in terms of what would impress other political operatives, but you have to forget about what the operative class thinks and get your mind in what Joe Sixpack thinks. And one of the things that I feel like is one of our strengths is we cut through what average people, what the political class thinks, and think about what is disseminating. Like, for example, average people aren't talking about the Joe Biden speech with the red and the Marines. They are talking about the student loan thing doesn't seem fair. Average people are not completely sure what causes inflation. Now, they're blaming on Biden, but when you assume that they know that government spending causes inflation, you're making a mistake. They don't. So I don't believe that average people know things that most people think they know, and I don't assume they hold the values that I do. I generally try to assume that they are somewhere very much different and look at it different. And the number one rule, and this is in my company, is we watch and read a diversity of news. You may see me on Fox a lot, but I watch a lot of MSNBC. I watch a lot of CNN. I have a subscription to the New York Times. I believe in getting a full perspective, because if you don't understand what all sides are saying, you cannot poll all sides.
I think that was about the best end of a podcast we've had in quite a while. Let me just ask you, where can people find you? Tell them where to find you online.
They can find me at Robert Cahaly, or at Robert Cahaly on Twitter, at Trafalgar_group on Twitter, or TrafalgarGroup.com or thetrafalgargroup.org. Both websites go to the same place. And look forward to having you keep up. It's going to be a bumpy ride. We've got a lot of stuff to come out between now and then. Most of the battleground states will have 5 more polls per state between now and November 8th.
Wow. All right. Well, we're looking forward to it, Robert. This will be a treat for our viewers and audience. Thank you once again on behalf of Star Spangled Gamblers.
Sounds good. Y'all have a good day.
Thank you.